Welcome to Mindshift. I'm Brandon. Today is another, I don't know, is it another Tuesday takedown, a Saturday short? Is it a Sunday video? Did I turn this into a series? All I know is I had some time to film and I just went down the rabbit hole watching Eric Hovind debate an atheist. But as I'm watching these, there's so much misinformation, there's so much incorrectness that I'm actually at a loss. I don't know where to begin. Am I going to strew all this together, kind of like what we did with the Apostle Catherine Crick, or should we focus in on a particular subject? I am just talking off the cuff with you guys here. Normally I come with some idea, but I just turned the camera on today and said, let's see what happens. I think where I want to focus this just a little bit is the true believer aspect. So there's two clips that I know I want to show, and we'll see if we get into all the morality stuff. I might save that for when I do my video on morality, because Eric Hovind's version of what the atheist life must be like without God and his morality is absurd. So again, so much I want to talk about. Let's start with this video here.
You actually discovered who you really are. More than deconverting and saying I was a Christian, because Jude says those that left us were never among us. I can't go from a position of Christ is my authority to now I'm going to be the authority because
which is the way it goes. Yeah, and you're right. Calvinists would agree with you. The P in the tulip, perseverance of the saints, says that exact same thing, that they were never Christians in the first place.
Even the logical conclusion of if Christ is the Lord of my reasoning now as a Christian, you can never reason to the conclusion that I'm now the Lord of my reasoning. So even from a logical perspective, it's not possible to say I used to be a Christian and now I'm not.
This man using logic is hilarious to me. The amount of fallacies that I've seen just in the 8 shorts that I watched this morning are baffling. But this is one thing I've talked about a lot on the channel, so I'm not going to repeat or beat a dead horse too much here. Obviously, he is of the notion that anyone who deconverts or deconstructs or backslides or whatever terminology we want to do was never really a Christian to begin with. Usually how I tackle this topic is just talking about how problematic it is, right? If someone really believes with all of their heart that they are indeed saved, that they are a Christian, that they believe in Jesus, they're going to church, they're reading their Bible, they're praying, they're sharing the gospel message, they feel the Holy Spirit is working in them. If they can wake up one day and believe none of that is any longer true, and the Christian that looks at them says, see, you just never really believed, then what stops that Christian from applying that line of logic to themselves? By saying that person had the ability to be so deceived, they hurt themselves. They allow for the possibility of someone to have these spiritual encounters and experiences and emotions and phenomenon that look at the end to be extremely man-made, just part of our natural psychology, which of course is what all of this really is. But let's not hit on it too much from that point. Let's look at something that he said here right at the end of the clip. If Christ is the Lord of my reasoning, then I could never now reason to the conclusion that I'm the Lord of my reasoning. I think maybe a term we need to get away from is Lord of reasoning, with the black or white fallacy of it being either Jesus Christ or me, myself. Reasoning, in the way that he's using this term, is how we look at things logically, how we purport to know truth. And so if one is using the figure of Christ to do so, to align with what makes sense, what is real, how do we know what we know, if we're using Christ as the base, the Lord of our reasoning, then within that line of reasoning, we could never then hop to this other side of me being Lord of the reasoning, except, and this is where it gets important, and this is what I think he's missing, if we come to find out that Christ is not real, that Jesus is thus then not a good Lord of our reasoning, that there's no reason to take what he says or what the Bible claims as truth. Now, to a point, I understand what he's saying. If you've really already subscribed to the idea that this is indeed true, that God is real, then you would stay within that framework, that he is then the Lord of our reasoning. At what point do you get outside of that framework to question it enough to see the truth that God does not exist, and thus there needs to be a better thing to reason off of, like logic or the world around us as it actually occurs and is observable and testable, etc. And so it sounds to me like what he's saying is the true Christian is one who is incapable of questioning. The true Christian, the person who cannot fall away, is the person who will never, ever, ever consider the fact that maybe Jesus is not Lord. This would be blind belief, believing like a child, all the things the Bible tells us to do to maintain a faith. Because despite how much Plantinga tries to assert that reason and faith are the same, which I bring that up because they both talk about Plantinga here, but despite how much that claim is made, they are almost at each other's opposites. And by the way, I think someone can be fully 100% seeking God, believing in the claim of Jesus Christ to be who he is, and have things happen in their life, happen to them, knowledge that gets put in front of them, that pokes a hole in it, that causes doubt. Good reason to doubt. Unless you lock yourself in a true echo chamber with full control of what information is going to come in front of you, you are at the mercy of what happens around us, right? Like, I'm not trying to dig too deep into this. I think that what he's saying here only works if you get to be the full author of the information presented to you, and that's just not how life works. So again, can you be a sincere believer? Can you be someone who is getting their reasoning from the Bible, from a belief in God that trickles down into everything else wholeheartedly, 100%, and still have that change? Yes, you can. That's why I can say that as much as anyone is a Christian, I was a Christian, and now I am not. You can do this with anything. You can wake up to anything. Eric, in another one of these clips, goes on to say that if he had died at 18, he would have split the gates of hell open, whatever that means, because he didn't really know God. He didn't really believe of his own volition until he was 20. Everything before that was an act. It was fake for his family, for a sense of ego and self-righteousness in classes, etc. So then something changed for him. He had an idea of how the world was, and then new ideas came into his head, and he subscribed to those. It's called changing your mind. It's called utilizing new information. Now, I think he went the wrong direction with it, but based off either some kind of head knowledge, gut feeling, or personal experience, people wind up with vastly different ideas and outcomes. To say that as soon as you're locked into Jesus is that outcome, you cannot any longer physically, spiritually, mentally make a shift out of that would be akin to emotional and mental slavery that Jesus would cause for the believer. So now we either have this huge free will issue, or people are still free to use their mind and see what adds up. And what does not appear to add up for many people, who then begin looking at the scriptures with a critical eye, who then begin to look at the world around them and say, does this line up with what God has said he intends? Who look at the morality of the Bible compared to what is supposed to be the nature of God and say 1 + 1 is not equaling 2 here, and reason themselves away from this prior foothold of reason that seems to be now invalid. I don't understand why that is so hard for the believer or the Christian to accept and understand. Instead, though, they have to say, nope, this person never really believed. That's just an insane statement. Do you say this about your children when they believe in Santa at 4, and then, who knows, 5, 6, 7, whenever, they no longer believe in Santa? Now that they have come to a better reasoning, do you say, oh, well, if you're now really knowing from this better position of knowledge that Santa can't be real, you never believed in Santa? That wouldn't make any sense. That kid 100% believed in Santa. To say otherwise is absolutely illogical. The real break in logic here is for the Christian to say some claim about the inner workings of someone they don't know and arrive at an outcome about either their level of belief or sincerity or experience because their outcome doesn't align with what they believe. It's insane. And I go through all of this with this first clip because I know I wanted to show this second clip with then how it gets applied to children. So let's watch clip 2.
I love doing youth events because there are a ton of kids growing up in church that are just, and this is what it's showing us, that are just the product of their environment. They're not really disciples of Jesus Christ. It's more than 70% now, closer to 80% of kids who grew up in Christian homes and then attend a secular university will reject God. Why? Because they weren't really Christians to begin with.
So you can see how dumb and harmful this line of thinking is from the first clip when applied to the real world. This man has heard the numbers, and it seems he even believes the numbers, which is already a step in the right direction for him, considering some of his other qualms with believing science. We'll get to those in another video. So kids that are raised in Christian households, that are going to these youth trips, that are involved in ministry, etc., they go to a secular university, and then 70 up to 80% of them deconvert, fall away. And we know that our boy Eric here loves logic, so he's probably using Occam's razor here to say what is the most likely cause of this. And the best he can come up with is that 80% of these people who claimed they were Christian, that then went to a secular university and fell away, just must not have been Christian, just must not really have actually believed. They weren't true. They were just a product of their environment. That's the one he got right. They were a product of their environment. Indoctrination is a hell of a drug. They were brought up, sheltered, and told over and over during their formative years while their brain was still developing what was true, what couldn't be questioned, what was taboo, how the others around them didn't have what they had, how they were the ones with access to secret knowledge, that they had an invisible person in their life working for them, talking to them, speaking to them, answering their prayers, responding to their faith. And it's hilarious because later they go on in this conversation to talk about the confirmation bias. That's what indoctrination is. Then you send your kids to a Christian school with Christian teachers. They have Christian family members and Christian daycare sitters. And everyone in their life in a position of any kind of an authority is saying the same things back to them. Yes, let's pray about that. Yes, God told me this. Have you read your Bible this week? Did you see this? Have you had this experience? Have you asked God into your heart? It's all just right there over and over and over, beating it into a child. You can get a child to believe anything. I could make up the craziest thing in the world, and if I constructed a community around me that fed that back into the child, I could get any kid ever in the history of mankind to believe anything. So what's more likely? That those tactics only worked long enough that you could keep the indoctrination process going as long as you could control the influences in this person's life, and then when they finally get escaped from that, truly escaped, and they learn to critically think, and they see the flaws, and they see other people with other belief systems, and they reason finally for the first time for themselves instead of what you wanted them to, and they come to a different conclusion, good for them. It takes so much to be willing to question what was your status quo. It takes so much to look at truth despite your feelings, despite the judgment of people like this looking down on you. I've shared much about the problematic nature of teaching children these impossible and ridiculous things like I did in my video from last Sunday on prophecy. I've barely touched a fraction of what goes on out there. Purity culture, the fear of hell, the shame, the guilt of sin, the judgment and comparison, and on and on and on. It's beyond sickening. The last thing anyone needs is the confusion of Christianity to hear that these people fell away because they were never real believers, which is what this man's message is. The shame and guilt of maybe getting it wrong when trying to leave that horrible anti-truth mindset, or the judgment afterwards once you make it out and you're told and belittled and demeaned that you still just don't get it, that you never really got it, that it was never real. It's like, dude, I just dedicated my entire life up until this point to this idea, this concept, this belief system. Just because I finally escaped it does not mean you get to take away what I knew was real to me for so long. He's saying here at the beginning he loves doing youth events because he knows that 70-80% of these people are just faking it, that it's not real to them. He wants to reach them. He wants to be another voice in their ear, trying to get his version of truth into them early and often. That's what he's excited about. That's what he's passionate about. It's disgusting. Why do we feel we must control children to this extent? I understand that any adult influence, a authority figure influence, is going to come across as indoctrination. It doesn't have to be religious. Children will believe for a long time what we teach them until they are more capable of digging in and doing it for themselves. With that knowledge, then what would be the best thing to teach children? An absolute that can't be proved, like Jesus' resurrection and all the implications that trickle down from that, or an openness to learning information, a love for the truth, regardless of where it goes, the tools necessary to be able to divine that truth, the critical thinking, the logic, the rationality, the morals of kindness, that even when people disagree with you, they shouldn't be shunned, concepts of inclusion instead of exclusion, empathy, honesty. It's funny because so much of that is what the modern day Christian thinks they're doing, and maybe they are, but they're doing it then despite the Bible, despite the core belief system. But how much better would this world be and these childhoods for these individuals and their sake of sanity later on in their life if they're not working through the childhood trauma of being indoctrinated into a false religion with harmful byproduct teaching, with basic levels of harm baked in to the source material. So that's it for my preaching today. Again, I didn't know where it was going to go. I feel like I could just keep talking for hours on end. I feel like I just want to play you clip after clip after clip from this conversation and show you everything that is wrong with this line of thinking. Thank you for all of the support, and until next time, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tier Iconoclast patrons, Shawn Skaggs and Jason Rollins, followed by my newest atheist advocate, Jarrod Nichols, for their incredible generosity. And also a special thanks to my 3 secular scholars. All other patrons are listed in the description of each video. Please consider joining this group if you enjoy these videos or believe in the channel's mission. Thanks, and have a great day.